Will you plait my hair like Mamma did? The girl asked the maid. The Duke stood silent at the door. His heart, a thing he had long considered a dense and useless stone in his chest, seemed to crack. Not a clean break, but a splintering, a shattering into 1,000 icy shards that pierced his lungs and made it impossible to draw breath. The maid was his wife, the girl was his daughter, and he was a ghost haunting the frame of a life he had personally demolished. The maid, Genevieve, did not look up. Her hands, which had once been soft enough to glide over ivory keys and fine embroidery, were chapped and reddened. They moved with a practiced economy through the fine, corn silk hair of their daughter, Rosalind. She was a stranger in this rough-spun dress, her posture betraying a weariness that went deeper than muscle. But the line of her neck, the gentle curve of her spine as she bent to her task, was a portrait seared into his memory. Like Mamma did? Genevieve's voice was low, a melody roughened by sea salt and sorrow. How did Mamma do it, my love? Rosalind, all of 5 years old and utterly unaware of the cataclysm her simple question had invoked, squirmed on the small stool. She used to sing, she said, her voice small but clear, a song about a river, and her fingers were so soft, not like yours. Yours are scratchy. The words were not cruel. They were a child's simple, brutal observation, but Alistair saw Genevieve flinch as if struck. He saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped the wooden comb. For a moment she was utterly still, a statue of loss in the dim flickering light of the inn's back room. The air smelled of tallow, stale ale, and damp wool. It was the scent of her penance, and his damnation. He had stood in this doorway for what felt like an eternity, but it could only have been a minute. He had travelled for weeks, following the thinnest of threads, a trail 5 years cold, propelled by a dawning horror that had clawed its way up from the pit of his stomach. He had found her, he had found them, and the reality was 1,000 times worse than the empty, echoing hell of his imagination. She finally looked up, her eyes drawn to the sudden blockage of light in the doorway. Her gaze, when it met his, was not filled with the fire of anger or the tears of remembered pain. It was empty. A vast, vacant landscape of exhaustion. She looked at him as one might look at a stray dog that had wandered in from the rain, a mild, detached curiosity with no hint of recognition, or perhaps no desire to recognize. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She called him sir, her, the Duchess of Blackwood. The word was a blade. He felt it slide between his ribs. He had practiced this moment in his mind, rehearsed speeches of apology, of explanation, of rage at the man who had deceived him. He had imagined her fury, her tears, her accusations. He was prepared for a storm. He was not prepared for this desolate calm. He took a step into the room, his polished boots loud and obscene on the rough wooden floorboards. The movement seemed to break the spell. Genevieve's eyes widened, the emptiness finally flooded with something he could name, shock, and then a colder, harder emotion, fear. She instinctively pulled Rosalind closer, her body a shield. "You," she breathed. The word was a puff of air, a ghost of a sound. Rosalind looked from her mother's pale face to the tall, dark stranger looming in the doorway. She did not know him. Alistair felt the truth of that in his very bones. This child, his heir, had no memory of her own father. "Genevieve," he said, his voice a rasp. The name felt foreign on his tongue, a treasure he had no right to hold. She rose slowly, pushing Rosalind gently behind her skirts. The protective gesture was as primal as a she-wolf guarding her cub. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. The flatness was gone, replaced by a low, simmering tremor of fury. "How did you find us?" "It took a long time," he answered, his gaze fixed on her, trying to reconcile the Duchess he had cast out with this hardened, weary woman. The fine bones of her face were more prominent now, the delicate shadows under her eyes etched into permanent bruises of fatigue. She was thinner, but she stood taller, straighter, as if the weight of the world had forged her spine into steel. "I made a mistake." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "A mistake?" she repeated, the sound brittle. "You call it a mistake? You stood before 200 members of the ton and called me an adulteress. You threw me out of my home in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. You accused me of carrying another man's child." Her hand went to Rosalind's head, a gesture of pure, unthinking possession. "You call that a mistake? I call it annihilation." He had no defense. She was right. He remembered that night with a clarity that felt like a physical illness. The heat of the ballroom, the suffocating scent of lilies and beeswax, the smug, concerned face of his cousin Marcus, whispering poison into his ear. He remembered the forged letters in his coat pocket, their damning words feeling like hot coals against his skin. He remembered the wild, blind rage, a sickness of pride and wounded vanity that had consumed all reason. The letters were forgeries, he said, the words tasting like ash. The man they spoke of, he does not exist. I was a fool. Deceived. Genevieve stared at him, her expression unreadable. Deceived, she echoed softly. And it only took you 5 years to discover it. 5 years, Alistair. My daughter thinks I am a maid named Mrs. Finch. She has never slept in a proper bed. She has worn dresses made from flour sacks. I have scrubbed floors and mended fishing nets until my fingers bled, all while you languished in your ducal palace, mourning your wounded pride. I was not languishing, he bit out, the injustice of that single word piercing his self-loathing. I was in hell, a hell of my own making, but hell nonetheless. The great echoing halls of Blackwood Manor had become his prison. The silence was the loudest sound he had ever known. Every polished surface reflected a solitary, haunted man. Every empty chair at the dining table was an accusation. His cousin, Marcus, had been his shadow, his constant companion in misery, ever ready with a decanter of brandy and a sympathetic word. How he had loathed him in the end, how he had loathed himself more for ever believing him. Your hell had feather beds and hot meals, Genevieve shot back, her voice sharp with contempt. My hell had the constant gnawing fear of starvation, the terror that my child would be taken from me for vagrancy. Do not speak to me of your hell. He could not. He had no right. Rosalind peeked out from behind her mother's legs. Mamma, she whispered, her voice trembling. Who is that man? Genevieve knelt, turning her body to completely block Alistair from their daughter's sight. It is no one, my sweet, she murmured, her voice once again soft and reassuring. Just a lost traveler. He will be on his way soon. The dismissal was as complete as it was devastating. A lost traveler. He, Alistair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood, was no one. He had forfeited his name, his place, his very existence in their lives. No, he said, the word raw and desperate. He took another step forward. Genevieve shot to her feet. Stay back, she commanded, and there was a new note in her voice, a dangerous edge he had never heard before. She reached for the one weapon available in the small, cluttered room, a heavy iron poker resting by the cold hearth. She held it not with the awkwardness of a lady, but with the grim competence of a woman who knew what it was to defend herself. I swear to you, Alistair, if you come one step closer to her, I will use this. He froze. He looked from the poker to her face, a pale, determined mask in the gloom. He saw no bluff in her eyes. She would do it. This woman, who had once fainted at the sight of a spider, would brain a duke without a moment's hesitation to protect her child. The transformation was terrifying and, in a strange, painful way, magnificent. He had made her this. He had taken a delicate hothouse flower and thrown it into the wilderness, and it had not withered. It had grown thorns of iron. I am not here to harm you, he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I am here to undo what I have done. You cannot, she said simply. Some things, once broken, can never be mended. You cannot give Rosalind back her first 5 years. You cannot give me back my name, my peace, my trust in you. It is all gone. Ashes. He remembered the fire in his study, the night she had fled. He had thrown the forged letters into the grate, watching the paper curl and blacken, a symbolic cleansing of her treachery. But the treachery had been his own. The ashes were all that was left of his honor. I can give you back your name, he insisted, his voice low and urgent. I can prove your innocence. I can destroy the man who did this to us. The man who did this to us is standing in this room, she countered, her grip on the poker unwavering. Marcus, he said, the name a curse. It was Marcus. He orchestrated all of it. The rumors, the letters, he wanted the title. He wanted me to cast you aside so that he, as my heir presumptive, would be one step closer. A flicker of something crossed her face, not belief, but the faintest shadow of memory. She had never liked Marcus. She had found his fawning sympathy cloying, his presence unsettling. She had told Alistair as much, but he had dismissed her concerns as feminine jealousy, another sin to add to his ledger. It does not matter who held the pen, she said, her voice weary again. You were the one who held the axe, Alistair. You were the one who brought it down. She was right. The fault was his, utterly, completely. He had been so blinded by arrogance, so insulated by a lifetime of privilege, that he had never once questioned the word of his loyal cousin over the quiet dignity of his own wife. He had wanted to believe the lie because the lie was dramatic and engaging, a tempest in the sterile quiet of their polite arranged marriage. The truth that his wife was simply a gentle, lonely woman trapped in a gilded cage had been too mundane for his ducal tastes. "I know," he whispered. "God help me, I know." He finally lowered his hands, his shoulders slumping. He looked not at her, but at the child still hiding behind her. His daughter, the shape of her ears, the stubborn set of her small chin. They were his, a legacy he had thrown away like so much trash. "Please," he said, and the word was a ragged plea. "Do not make me leave. Not yet. Let me just stay in the village. I will not trouble you. I will not come here again unless you permit it. But I cannot leave. I cannot lose you both again." Genevieve watched him, her mind a whirlwind. For 5 years, her survival had depended on being invisible, on being Mrs. Finch, the quiet widow. His presence here was a torch thrown into her carefully constructed world of shadows. He was the Duke of Blackwood. He brought with him power, attention, and danger. The life she had built was as fragile as a gull's egg. He could shatter it with a single careless word. And yet, the sight of him, stripped of his usual ducal arrogance, his face etched with a pain that mirrored her own, touched a part of her she thought had died. He looked broken. Good. He deserved to be broken. But there was something else in his eyes too, a desperate sincerity, a flicker of the man she had once long ago hoped he might become. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why should I trust a single word that comes out of your mouth?" "You should not," he admitted, his honesty a shock. "I have not earned your trust. I do not ask for it. I only ask for a chance to earn it. Let my actions speak for me. I will find a room. I will stay out of your way, but I will be here, and I will begin to set things right." He looked at Rosalind again, a deep, aching sorrow in his eyes. She has my mother's eyes," he murmured. Genevieve's grip on the poker faltered. It was true. The same startling blue, a shade so specific it was known in the family as the Blackwood blue. It was the one feature that had sometimes caused her a pang of fear, that some sharp-eyed visitor might see the Duke's mother staring back at them from a common maid's child. "Leave," she said, her voice firm, but the iron was gone from it. "For tonight, go, find a room at the other end of the village, the Fisherman's Rest. It is adequate." She could not bring herself to send him to a place with any degree of comfort. He nodded, not questioning. "The Fisherman's Rest," he repeated, memorizing the name. He looked at her one last time, his gaze lingering on her worn hands, her tired face. "Thank you," he said, the words imbued with a humility she had never before heard from him. Then he turned and walked away, his tall frame disappearing into the encroaching twilight. The doorway was empty again. Genevieve stood for a long moment, the heavy poker suddenly a dead weight in her hand. She let it fall to the floor with a loud clang. The sound broke the tension, and a shudder racked her entire body. She sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around herself. Rosalind crept out from behind her. "Mama?" she asked, her small hand touching Genevieve's arm. "Are you cold?" Genevieve pulled her daughter into her arms, burying her face in the child's soft, clean hair. It smelled of soap and the sea. She held on tight, as if he might reappear and snatch her away. He had called her Genevieve. No one had called her that in 5 years. The name felt like a phantom limb, an ache of a life that no longer existed. He was here. After all this time, he was here. And she did not know if he was her salvation or her final, complete ruin. The Fisherman's Rest was not adequate. It was a hovel. The room Alistair secured was small, damp, and smelled overwhelmingly of brine and decay. A thin, lumpy mattress lay on a rickety frame, and a single grimy window looked out over a wall of wet, glistening stone. It was perfect. It was a fraction of the misery he deserved. He sat on the edge of the cot, the springs groaning in protest, and did not bother to light the single candle. He let the darkness and the stench of the place envelop him. This was real. The perfumed, polished emptiness of Blackwood was the illusion. This squalor, this raw, aching despair was the truth of what he had wrought. For 5 years he had allowed himself the luxury of a tragic, brooding narrative. He was the wronged husband, the betrayed patriarch, his ducal pride the primary casualty. He had nursed his grievance like a precious wound. Even as doubt began to creep in, a slow, insidious vine strangling his certainty, he had clung to his role as the victim. It had started with small things, a memory of Genevieve's blush when he'd complimented a gown, the way she'd cared for a sick stable hand, sitting by his bed herself because the village doctor was away, her complete lack of artifice. These memories didn't align with the cunning, deceitful creature from Marcus's letters. The turning point had come a year ago. He was in his library, half drunk on brandy, when he'd stumbled upon a book of poetry, sonnets from the Portuguese. It had been her favorite, a gift from her father. He opened it, and a dried flower, a wild violet, fell from its pages. He remembered the day she had picked it on a rare walk they had taken together in the first year of their marriage. She had been so quiet, so shy, but her face had lit up with such simple, honest joy at the sight of the flowers dotting the meadow. A woman who cherished a single, pressed violet was not a woman who would engage in a sordid, clandestine affair for thrills. The thought had struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blind, pathetic fool. The next day, he had hired a Bow Street runner, a discreet and brutally efficient man named Graves. He gave him the details from the letters, the name of the supposed lover, the places of their alleged trysts. He ordered Graves to find the man, to find everything. It took months. The reports came back, each one another nail in the coffin of his self-deception. The addresses were false. The man, a supposed Captain Thorne from a distant regiment, did not exist. The stationer who sold the distinctive paper of the letters was located, and after some persuasion, he recalled selling a large quantity to a valet who worked for Lord Marcus Thorne. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it had almost driven him mad. It wasn't just that Marcus had lied, it was that Alistair had been such a willing, eager participant in the lie. Marcus had merely played a tune on an instrument that was already primed for the melody. Alistair's own pride, his insecurity in their cold marriage, his deep-seated fear that a woman as gentle as Genevieve could never truly want a man as hard as him. Marcus had seen it all and used it against him. He had confronted his cousin. The scene had been ugly. Marcus, trapped and exposed, had not been repentant. He had been venomous, spitting accusations of Alistair's own coldness, his neglect of Genevieve. "I only gave you what you already believed," he had screamed, his face contorted with years of festering jealousy. "You never deserved her. You never saw her at all." Alistair had thrown him out, stripped him of his allowance, and begun the legal process to have him formally disinherited, a complex and scandalous affair. But it wasn't enough. It was a hollow, meaningless victory without Genevieve. He had to find her. Graves's search for her had been even harder. A duchess could not simply vanish, but a desperate woman with a child could. She had been smart, avoiding major cities and coaching routes. It was a chance remark from a retired soldier, remembering a quiet, well-spoken woman he'd given a ride to on a farm cart years ago that had finally led them to the coast. From there, it was a painstaking process of elimination, village by village, until a name, Mrs. Finch, and a description matched. And now here he was, in a damp, stinking room, with the sound of the sea hissing against the shore like a constant accusation. He had found her, and she hated him, rightly so. He had promised her actions. His first action was to stay in this room, to accept this discomfort as a down payment on a debt that could never be fully repaid. He would not sleep. He would sit in the dark, and he would remember. He would remember the feel of her hand in his on their wedding day, small and trembling. He would remember her quiet weeping in the night when she thought he was asleep. He would remember the look on her face in that ballroom, the utter devastation before the cold shock had set in. He would force himself to relive every moment of his cruelty, every failure of his heart. This was his vigil, the first of many. The next morning, Genevieve woke before dawn. It was habit. The inn's chores waited for no one. But today, the familiar routine felt alien. Her world had tilted on its axis. He was here. She moved through the motions of lighting the kitchen fire, her hands clumsy. Every footstep outside, every distant voice sent a jolt of panic through her. She half expected him to be on the doorstep, demanding, ducal, impatient. But the street remained empty, save for the usual fishermen heading to their boats. Mrs. Gable, the inn's owner, a stout woman with a shrewd but kind face, found her staring into the flames. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Jenny," she said, using the affectionate name she'd given her years ago. More than usual, that is. Genevieve had been a ghost when she'd arrived, A wraith with a baby, a small pouch of money, and a terror in her eyes that Mrs. Gable had recognized. The older woman had asked no questions, simply offered her a room, a job, and the quiet, unyielding protection of her anonymity. Genevieve couldn't meet her eyes. "A traveler came by last night," she said, her voice low, "looking for a room." I heard. Took the old crabber's cottage at the far end of the spit, must be desperate, or doing penance." Mrs. Gable poured herself a cup of tea. "A toff," cook said. "Fine boots and a coat worth more than this whole inn." She looked at Genevieve, her gaze sharp. "He didn't cause you any trouble, did he?" "No," Genevieve said, the lie sticking in her throat. "He was a ghost from a past life." Mrs. Gable nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. She had always known Genevieve was more than she seemed. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, even when scrubbing floors, betrayed a breeding that no fisherman's widow possessed. "The past has a nasty habit of catching up," she said quietly. "You just have to decide if you're going to keep running or turn and face it. Now the bread won't knead itself." The advice was blunt, practical, and exactly what Genevieve needed. She turned to the flour bin, her thoughts churning. What did she want? Did she want him gone? The thought brought a wave of relief, a return to the safe, hard-won peace of her hidden life. But underneath it, there was another current, something she was ashamed to admit even to herself. A flicker of hope. He had said Marcus was to blame. He had said he was deceived. If it was true, if he had not cast her out in a fit of pure malice but out of a terrible, manipulated mistake, did that change anything? It changed the motive, but not the act. He had still judged her, condemned her, and sentenced her without a trial. He had still failed the most fundamental test of faith between a husband and a wife. But he was Rosalind's father. That was the truth she could not escape. Rosalind deserved a father, not a ghost, not a lost traveler, but a real one. And she deserved her name, Lady Rosalind Beaumont. She deserved a life beyond this small village, a future of opportunity and security that Genevieve, as Mrs. Finch, could never provide. Her own pride, her own wounded heart, she could perhaps bear. But could she, in good conscience, deny her daughter her birthright out of spite? The dilemma was a physical weight, pressing down on her as she worked. She saw him later that day. She was hanging laundry in the inn's yard, the wind whipping her skirts and snatching the wet linen from her hands. He was standing on the low sea wall at the far end of the street, just watching. Not her, specifically. He was watching the waves crash against the rocks, his tall figure a stark, lonely silhouette against the gray sky. He looked out of place in his fine, dark clothes, like a crow in a flock of gulls. He made no move to approach her. He just stood there, for hours, a sentinel at the edge of her world. It was unnerving. His presence was a constant, low thrum of anxiety beneath the surface of her day. The villagers noticed, of course. Whispers followed him. The rich Londoner, come to the coast for his health, or perhaps hiding from something. Days turned into a week. He kept his promise. He did not approach the inn. He did not try to speak to her, but she was aware of him, always. She would see him walking the windswept beach, his head bowed against the spray. She saw him speaking to a fisherman, haggling for the purchase of fish, his deep voice carrying on the wind. He was learning the rhythms of the place. He was waiting. His patience was, in its own way, more potent than any demand. The Alistair she knew was not a patient man. He was a man of action, of immediate gratification, his will imposed on the world around him. This quiet, watchful stranger was someone new. The first crack in her resolve came from Rosalind. "Mama," she asked one evening, as Genevieve was tucking her into her small cot, "the sad man gave me this." She held out her hand. In her palm was a small, exquisitely carved wooden bird, its wings half spread as if in flight. Genevieve's blood ran cold. "The sad man? When did you speak to him?" "Today, on the beach," Rosalind said, unconcerned. "You were talking to Mrs. Gable. I was building a sand castle, and he came and sat nearby. He didn't say much, just asked me the name of my castle. Then he gave me this. He said he used to carve them when he was a boy." Genevieve took the bird. It was smooth and warm from her daughter's hand. The craftsmanship was surprisingly fine. "You must not speak to strangers, Rosalind," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Rosalind's face fell. "He's not a stranger. He is the man who was in our room. Is he a bad man, Mamma?" Genevieve looked at her daughter's worried face, and the lie died on her lips. What could she say? "Yes, he is a monster who destroyed our lives." Or, "No, he is your father, the Duke of Blackwood, who cast us out but now feels very sorry about it." "No," she said finally, her voice soft. "He is not a bad man. He is just a man who is very sad." That's what I thought, Rosalind said, her relief palpable. She took the bird back, clutching it to her chest. I think he's lonely. Genevieve felt a pang in her chest, a child's simple, devastating empathy. He was lonely. Of course he was. He had hollowed out his own life, and now he was adrift. And he was reaching out, not through her, but through their child, with the simplest of offerings. A small wooden bird. It was not a ducal jewel. It was not a grand gesture. It was something he had made. The next day, Alistair received a visitor at his hovel. Graves, the Bow Street runner, had arrived by coach, his face as grim and impassive as ever. He carried a heavy leather satchel. "Your Grace," he said, bowing slightly as Alistair let him into the cramped, damp room. Graves did not so much as blink at the squalor. "What have you found?" Alistair asked, foregoing any pleasantries. Graves opened the satchel on the small, rickety table. He laid out several documents. "Lord Marcus Thorne has fled the country, Your Grace. He took passage on a ship bound for the Americas 2 days after your confrontation. He has, it appears, liquidated what assets he could." Alistair felt a surge of cold fury. The coward. "And the forger?" "His name is Finch," Graves said, and Alistair flinched at the irony of the name Genevieve had chosen. "A disgraced clerk with a gambling problem. We found him in a debtor's prison. He was more than willing to provide a full, signed confession in exchange for his debts being cleared and a small stipend." Graves pushed a document across the table. "It is all here. Dates, payments, details of his meetings with Lord Marcus." Alistair picked up the confession. The spidery script detailed the entire conspiracy, a meticulous and cold-blooded campaign to ruin an innocent woman. It was vile. It was proof. "There is more," Graves said, his voice neutral. "I took the liberty of looking into the Duchess's movements after she left London. As you know, it was difficult, but I found the coaching inn where she first stopped. The innkeeper remembered her. A pale, frightened woman with a sleeping child." Alistair looked up sharply. "She had Rosalind with her? From the beginning?" He had assumed, in his arrogance, that she had abandoned the child, or that Rosalind was the product of the fictitious affair. The realization that she had taken their daughter with her that night, a terrified mother protecting her baby, sent a fresh wave of shame through him. "Yes, Your Grace," Graves confirmed. "She sold a pair of earrings, her own, not the Blackwood jewels, to pay for passage on a northbound mail coach. She was methodical. She was trying to disappear." He paused. "Your cousin, Lord Marcus, had men watching the main roads out of London, not to find her. Their instructions were to ensure she did not try to return." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Marcus hadn't just engineered her exile, he had policed it. He had ensured she could not come back, could not plead her case, could not be found until Alistair's rage had cooled and her fate was sealed. "Thank you, Graves," Alistair said, his voice thick. "You have done well. Your payment will be doubled." "Your Grace," Graves said with another slight bow. He packed his satchel, leaving the confession and his written report on the table. "Will there be anything else?" "Yes," Alistair said, his gaze distant. "Find out where Marcus is heading. I want to know where he is, always. He is not to be harmed, but he is to be watched, and he is to be reminded at every turn that he can never, ever come home." Graves nodded. "It will be done, Your Grace." After the runner had gone, Alistair stood for a long time, the forger's confession in his hand. This was it, the proof, the key to unlocking the prison of the last 5 years. But it was not a key to her heart. He knew that. This document could clear her name, but it could not erase her suffering. It could restore her title, but it could not restore her trust. He folded the papers carefully and placed them in his coat. He walked out of the cottage and down the street, not to the inn's front door, but to the yard in the back. She was there mending a large fishing net, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her fingers, the ones Rosalind had called scratchy, moved with a nimble skill that was mesmerizing. She saw him approach and her hands stilled. She stood up slowly, a wary expression on her face. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Genevieve," he said, his voice quiet. "May I have a word?" "We are having one now," she replied, her tone cool. "I have proof," he said simply, not wanting to preamble. "Of everything I told you. A confession from the man Marcus hired to forge the letters. Evidence that Marcus had you followed to ensure you could not return. It is all here." He held out the folded papers. She looked at the documents in his hand, then back at his face. She did not move to take them. "And what do you expect me to do with these?" she asked. "Frame them? Weep with gratitude that my name might be cleared in a world I no longer belong to?" I expect you to know the truth, he said, his voice earnest. The complete truth. I know it does not change what I did. I know it does not excuse my blindness, my cruelty, but you deserve to know that you were the victim of a conspiracy, not just the victim of my temper. You deserve to know that you were, in every way, innocent. She finally stepped forward and took the papers from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his, and the brief contact was like a bolt of lightning. He saw her flinch from it. She retreated a few steps, her back against the rough stone wall of the inn, and began to read. He watched her face. He saw her eyes scan the pages, saw the flicker of her expression as she absorbed the sordid details of Marcus's betrayal. He saw her jaw tighten, her knuckles turn white as she clutched the pages. This was not the vindication he had hoped to see. This was the confirmation of a nightmare. When she finished, she looked up, and her eyes were filled with a terrible, cold clarity. He never even gave me a chance, she whispered, more to herself than to him. He built the cage and locked the door before I even knew I was trapped. Her gaze lifted to meet Alistair's. And you, she said, her voice trembling with a fury that was more potent than any shout, you were his willing jailer. She held the papers out to him. Take them, she said. They are your proof, not mine. My proof is in my chapped hands and my daughter who does not know her own father. My proof is in every night I spent terrified and every day I spent hungry. I have lived the truth. I do not need to read it on a piece of paper. He felt as though she had physically struck him. He had thought this evidence was his weapon, his key. He saw now that it was just another reminder of his failure. It documented her innocence, but in doing so, it quantified his guilt. What do you want from me, Genevieve? He asked, his voice cracking. Tell me what to do. I will do anything. She shook her head, a bitter smile touching her lips. That's the problem, isn't it? You want to do something. You want a grand gesture, a ducal decree that will fix everything. But this isn't an estate that can be managed or a tenant that can be placated. This is a life, 2 lives. You shattered them, and you cannot command them to be whole again. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady, devoid of passion, which was somehow worse. Go home, Alistair. Go back to Blackwood. Publish this confession. Clear my name. Announce to the world that your Duchess was wronged and that you have cast out the villain. And then, when my name is clean, send for Rosalind. I will not deny her her birthright. She can be raised as Lady Rosalind Beaumont. She will have the life she was meant to have. The words hit him like a physical blow. Send for Rosalind. She was offering him his daughter, but not herself. And you? He managed to ask, his throat tight. I will disappear, she said simply. For good this time. I will find another village, another name. I will be free. It is all I have ever wanted. He stared at her horrified. This was her solution, to save her daughter by sacrificing herself, to give Rosalind the future she deserved by erasing herself from it. It was the most selfless and the most heartbreaking offer he could imagine, and it was a complete and utter rejection of him. No, he said, the word a raw tear in the quiet air. Absolutely not. I will not. I did not come all this way to tear my family apart for a second time. We are not a family, she retorted. We are a man, a woman, and a child bound by a tragedy of your making. Then we will become one, he vowed, stepping closer, his desperation making him bold. I will not leave this village. I will not leave you. If you want to remain Mrs. Finch, the innkeeper's maid, then fine. I will stay here as Mr. Beaumont, the sad, lonely man in the fisherman's cottage. I will stay here until my bones turn to dust if that's what it takes. But I will not leave my wife and child. A storm of emotions crossed her face. Anger, frustration, and something else, something she fought to conceal, a flicker of reluctant, painful hope. His refusal, his absolute stubborn refusal to accept her sacrifice, was the first thing he had done that felt truly selfless. He wasn't trying to fix things for his own comfort. He was refusing to benefit from her pain. You are a fool, she whispered. You are the Duke of Blackwood. You cannot live in a hovel and eat salted fish for the rest of your life. I can, he said, his gaze locked with hers. I can do anything but live without you again. That is the one thing I have found I cannot endure. A cry from the inn's doorway broke the tension. Mama? Rosalind stood there, rubbing her eyes, her nap clearly over. She saw Alistair and her face brightened. It's the sad man. She ran towards them, clutching the little wooden bird. She stopped at her mother's side, but her bright, curious eyes were on Alistair. Did you bring me another bird? She asked. Alistair's heart ached. He knelt slowly so as not to frighten her, bringing himself down to her level. "No, little one," he said, his voice gentle. "I did not. But perhaps we could find some good wood on the beach and carve one together." Rosalind looked to her mother for permission. Genevieve stood frozen, caught between the man her past knew and the child her present loved. His gaze on their daughter was filled with such a profound, unguarded tenderness it made her own heart ache. This was the father Rosalind deserved, this humble, patient man kneeling in the dirt, not the arrogant duke who had sent them into exile. Could they coexist? Could this new man truly have been born from the ashes of the old? "Go on," she heard herself say, the words feeling as though they were spoken by someone else, "but do not go far, and be back before the tide turns." Rosalind's delighted squeal was the only answer she needed. The child grabbed Alistair's large hand with her small one, her trust absolute and immediate. "Come on," she urged, pulling him towards the beach. "I know where the best driftwood is." Alistair looked back at Genevieve, his eyes filled with a gratitude so immense it was painful to see. "Thank you," he mouthed. She simply nodded, unable to speak. She watched them walk away, the tall, dark figure of the Duke and the small, bright girl, their hands linked. Father and daughter. A sight she had never thought she would see. She leaned against the cold stone wall, the confession papers crinkling in her hand. He had said he would stay, he had said he would wait. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might be like if he did. The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. Alistair became a quiet fixture in the village, and more importantly, in Rosalind's life. He kept his word, never encroaching on Genevieve's space at the inn, but he was always there on the periphery. He and Rosalind became a familiar sight on the beach, their heads bent together over a piece of driftwood, or their laughter carrying on the wind as they fled the incoming tide. He taught her things, the names of the seabirds, how to skip stones across the water's surface, how to tie a fisherman's knot. He was patient, gentle, and utterly devoted. Genevieve watched from a distance, her heart a tangled knot of conflicting emotions. It was a joy to see her daughter so happy, to see her blossom under the warmth of a father's love. But it was also a constant, painful reminder of what they had all lost. One afternoon, she was returning from the market, her basket heavy with vegetables, when she saw them sitting on the sea wall. Alistair was pointing out at the horizon, explaining something about the trading ships that passed in the distance. Rosalind was listening, rapt, her small face serious with concentration. He was giving her the world, a world beyond the confines of Seacrest, a world of geography and commerce and history, a world that was her birthright. He looked up and saw her watching. He gave her a small, hesitant smile. It was not the confident, charming smile of the Duke she had known, but something far more uncertain and vulnerable. On impulse, she found herself smiling back. A tiny, fleeting gesture, but it felt momentous. It felt like a thaw. He took it as the encouragement it was. Later that week, a crate was delivered to the inn, addressed to Mrs. Gable. Inside were bolts of fine, soft wool and muslin, packages of tea and sugar, and a small, leather-bound set of books, children's stories, and illustrated primers. There was no note from him, no claim of credit. It was an anonymous gift to the inn, but Genevieve knew he was not trying to buy her affection. He was trying to ease her life, to provide for them in the only way he could without overstepping the boundaries she had drawn. "Mrs." Gable raised an eyebrow. "A grateful guest, it seems," she said, her tone dry, but her eyes kind. "This will keep you and Rosalind in new dresses for a year, and proper books. She'll be reading before she's 6. That evening, as Rosalind slept, clutching a new book instead of the worn wooden bird, Genevieve walked out of the inn and down the dark street towards the fisherman's cottage. The wind was cold, and she hugged her shawl around her. She didn't know what she was going to say. "Thank you" felt too small. "I forgive you" felt too large and untrue. She found him sitting outside his door on an overturned lobster pot, mending one of Rosalind's broken toys by the light of a single lantern. The domesticity of the scene was startling. The Duke of Blackwood, his brow furrowed in concentration over a 3-legged wooden horse. He looked up as she approached, his expression surprised, then hopeful. He stood immediately. "Genevieve, is everything all right? Is Rosalind—" "She is fine," Genevieve interrupted softly. "She is asleep, with her new book." She gestured vaguely back towards the inn. "The crate, it was you." He nodded, not denying it. "I hoped it would be useful." "It was," she admitted. "Thank you." The words were quiet, but they hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "You do not have to thank me," he said, It is a pitiful offering, considering what is owed. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant roar of the sea. Why did you believe him? She asked, the question that had haunted her for years finally spoken aloud. Marcus, why was his word so much more powerful than your faith in me? Alistair looked away towards the dark, churning water. His face was a mask of self-loathing. Because he told me a story I could understand, he said, his voice low and raw. Our marriage, it was an arrangement, a duty. I did not know how to be the husband you deserved. I was cold, distant. I saw the sadness in your eyes, and I did not know how to breach it. It was easier to believe that your sadness stemmed from a passion for another man than to face the fact that it stemmed from a lack of passion from your own husband. It was easier to be the furious, wronged duke than the failed, inadequate man. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. It was cowardice, Genevieve, plain and simple. His confession was devastating. It was not an excuse, it was an explanation, a bearing of a soul so insecure and flawed she had never suspected it existed beneath the ducal armor. She had always seen his distance as arrogance, as a lack of interest. She had never considered it might be a shield for his own feelings of inadequacy. I was lonely, she whispered, the admission a painful echo of his own. That was all, just so terribly lonely. I know, he said, his voice thick with regret. And I left you alone. He took a hesitant step closer. I have done what you asked. The confession has been sent to my solicitor in London. It will be published in the papers. Your name will be cleared. Marcus is a ruined man, his name a synonym for disgrace. I have arranged for a trust to be established for Rosalind in her name. She will be a wealthy woman, independently of me for the rest of her life. Your future and hers is secure. You are free. He had done it. He had given her everything she had asked for. Freedom, security, vindication. She could walk away now, with her head held high, and start a new life. And what of you? She asked. I will return to Blackwood, he said, his shoulders slumping as if under a great weight. And I will wait. If you should ever find that you do not wish to be free of me, the door will be open, always. He was letting her go. After all his vows to stay, to wait forever, he was giving her the choice, truly and completely, with no pressure, no expectation. He had earned her trust not by staying, but by being willing to leave. She looked at his face, at the deep lines of sorrow and regret etched around his eyes. She saw the man he was, and the man he was becoming. She thought of Rosalind's laughter on the beach. She thought of the quiet, steady patience he had shown. She thought of his raw, painful honesty. The ice around her heart, the frozen shield she had lived behind for 5 long years, began to crack. I do not want to be free of you, Alistair, she said, the words surprising her as much as they did him. I want to go home. He stared at her, his expression one of disbelief, then of dawning, radiant joy. Genevieve, he breathed, her name a prayer. He reached for her, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them, as if he still did not dare to touch her. She closed the distance herself. She laid her hand on his chest over the frantic beating of his heart. I want to go home, she repeated, her voice stronger now, more certain. All of us, together. He covered her hand with his touch gentle, reverent, and then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of gratitude. It was a kiss of sorrow and regret, of hope and second chances. It was the taste of the salt from the sea and the promise of a new beginning. Their return to Blackwood was quiet. There was no grand procession, no triumphal re-entry. They arrived in a simple carriage, with a sleeping Rosalind between them. As they pulled up the long drive, Genevieve saw the manor, its great stone facade bathed in the late afternoon sun. It did not look like a prison anymore. It looked like a home waiting to be reclaimed. Alistair had sent word ahead. The staff was lined up in the great hall, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Genevieve walked in, holding Rosalind's hand, her chin held high. She was not the timid, uncertain girl who had left this house. She was its duchess, returned from exile. Alistair stood beside her. I present to you, he said, his voice clear and strong, ringing through the silent hall. Genevieve, Duchess of Blackwood, and our daughter, Lady Rosalind Beaumont. They have returned home. This house will honor them. It was a declaration, a new decree. The old order was dead, a new one was beginning. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of rediscovery. They were like strangers learning to live with one another, mapping the new territories of their hearts. Alistair was a different man. He was present, attentive. He listened. He asked her opinion on the running of the estate. He sought her partnership, not her obedience. Genevieve, in turn, began to shed the skin of Mrs. Finch. She brought light and air into the stuffy, formal rooms of Blackwood. She ordered the heavy velvet curtains taken down, replaced by light muslin that let the sun stream in. She filled the silent halls with flowers from the gardens. She brought life back into the house. Their healing was not in grand pronouncements, but in small, quiet moments, in the shared smile over Rosalind's latest antic, in his hand finding hers as they walked the grounds, in the way he would look for her when he entered a room, his eyes lighting up when he found her. One evening, he came to find her in Rosalind's bedroom. The fire was lit, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. Rosalind was in her nightgown, sitting on a stool in front of the hearth, and Genevieve was standing behind her, her fingers moving deftly through her daughter's long, silky hair. Alistair stopped in the doorway, the image a perfect, beautiful echo of the terrible scene in the inn. But everything was different. The air was warm and smelled of lavender soap. Genevieve was not a weary maid in rough spun, but a beautiful woman in a soft silk wrapper, her face serene. And he was not a ghost in the doorway, but a husband and a father, welcome in this space. Rosalind saw his reflection in a small looking glass. "Papa," she said happily, "Mama is plaiting my hair. She's singing the song about the river." Genevieve's hands did not stop. She met Alistair's gaze in the mirror, a soft, contented smile on her lips. She continued to hum the old lullaby, her voice low and sweet. He walked into the room and knelt beside them, his presence solid and reassuring. He reached out and gently touched a strand of Rosalind's hair. His fingers were warm. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, his eyes not on the plait, but on his wife. "Everything is." Genevieve finished the braid, tying it off with a silk ribbon. She leaned down and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "There," she said, "all done." Alistair held out his hand to her. She took it, and he helped her to her feet. They stood together, watching their daughter admire her reflection, their hands intertwined. The silence in the room was not empty. It was full of peace, of earned forgiveness, and of a love that had been lost and found, and was, at long last, home.